Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. Got the gang back together, Mike Rodak and Alex Scarborough, here on Thursday, November 21st, couple days away from Alabama, Oklahoma in Norman. 6:30 p.m. kickoff. Game's going to be on ABC. Guys, I didn't realize that this is Alabama's second ever trip to Norman and just their sixth ever game against Oklahoma. You would think two programs that are held in such high regard would have played more often. I was a little surprised by that.
It's called college football. Nobody actually plays anybody until recently in history.
Oh, yeah. And if the committee keeps doing what it's doing, I don't know how many more good games there'll be out of conference, but at least we get it now. I mean, it's an all-time uniform game.
Texas and Notre Dame just scheduled a series.
Yeah. And I will say the Oklahoma game does matter to Alabama because it was kind of the game that made Nick Saban change what they do defensively. I mean, Trevor Knight looked like Brett Favre in that bowl game a few years ago, and it was kind of the oh crap moment. We really need to figure out how to fix this, and shocker, they did.
You know who they brought in to fix it?
Lane Kiffin.
Wait, you're talking about Oklahoma?
Mm-hmm. Who did they bring in to fix it? Don't say Pete Golding.
You were saying the defense.
Yeah, it was the defense, and they changed the offense.
Right. Well, they changed the offense after the Ole Miss game, right? In 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
And then the Oklahoma game would have been, what, 2018?
No, it was the 2014 Sugar Bowl.
Oklahoma won the 2014 Sugar Bowl, or at least the Sugar Bowl played on January 2nd, 2014, 45-31. And then Alabama won the Orange Bowl in 2018, 45-34.
Right. Okay. I was mixing up games there. But, yeah, I think I was going to say
they did bring in Lane Kiffin that offseason.
Right. And Saban, maybe it's just him being friends with Hugh Freeze, has always given credit to Hugh Freeze for him bringing in Lane Kiffin and changing the offense. But perhaps Oklahoma deserves more credit in that discussion.
That should have been the deep dive story we should have written this week. That's what I'm gathering from that conversation.
Well, someone on this call has already written about it before, so I'm not going to do it again.
Heyo.
I've also written about that at AL.com. About
cool. I'm the one that should have written the story this week. That's also what I'm gathering now. Awesome. Great stuff.
You point a finger, you get a couple back at you.
Hell yeah.
To go back to the original point, that was the flaw with college football for a century, for decades. Like Alabama playing Mississippi State every year and playing Tulane and playing these schools that Southern Miss they would play all the time. And then you didn't actually play the other big brands. Like you might have seen them in a bowl game once every 15 years, but that was stupidity for the longest time in college football. And now I feel like there's actually a movement, partially because of conference realignment, but also with the playoff, also just with some of these non-conference matchups, that you're actually playing the other good teams. And turns out people want to watch those games on TV. How about that? Isn't that cool? They'd rather watch an Alabama-Oklahoma game than watch Alabama versus Mercer. It's great.
They can't even find what channel the Mercer game's on.
That's right.
Well, to be fair to them, it was not on a channel. You had to stream it. We will discuss part of that, right? I think the interest in the playoff and the 12-team playoff and the college football playoff released their third set of rankings. We'll discuss those and kind of games that we will be keeping an eye on in addition to the Alabama game this Saturday. We will also discuss the Alabama game, Alabama, Oklahoma. Interesting matchup, I think, in some regards. In other regards, maybe the Crimson Tide should walk into Norman and take care of business. We'll dig into that a little bit. But I wanted to start today's show. We used to start all of these shows with things that Alex wrote, and we're going to return to that again today because, Alex, you had a column earlier this week. Headline, forget whether teams should want to play in the SEC championship. Should the game even exist? And as that headline suggests, you basically outlined a case for dismantling the SEC championship game or getting rid of it or dumping it. What prompted you to write this? Because I love the SEC championship game.
It's a great game. I love covering it. It is past serving its purpose because of the way college football in the conference is set up right now. I mean, the fact that we on any given Saturday are looking at a website that looks like a beta version of the first website ever invented to try to figure out tiebreakers to tell us what team is going to go there is your first indication that things are wonky. The second one is you've got coaches like Lane Kiffin saying basically, we don't want to play in it. The risk is not worth the reward. And I don't always believe everything Lane Kiffin says. Neither should you. But this one, I think he's right. I think there are going to be a fair number of coaches who say, what's the point if I can go there and get a third loss and there's a threat of being bounced from the conference, from the playoff? And Greg Sankey and the SEC offices can say all they want. They can call them the runner-up. Even if that doesn't necessarily apply, I think the risk is there. And I think what troubles me more is the first point. I don't think we're going to accurately get the two best teams every year. I mean, I think if things hold, Alabama is going to play in an SEC championship, and Tennessee is going to sit at home when Tennessee beat Alabama. Conversely, if Tennessee goes to the SEC championship under some miracle, Georgia's going to sit there and say, wait, we just beat them a few weeks ago. Like, how accurate are we actually predicting the two teams that should compete in the game? So without divisions, there's no clean format, and there's too much risk. And the only thing that's left there is pride, I guess, but more accurately, money. So my solution is simple. Just add the 9th conference game, give ESPN 8 good games instead of one great game at the end of the year. I think they live with that, and we're all good. I mean, you still get your 4 bids. You don't run the risk of losing a team because they lost an important game that other teams didn't have to play.
I'm not a proponent of bringing back divisions because I like variety.
I agree.
I think one of the major factors for divisions going away was like you don't want to watch Alabama and Mississippi State every year. I don't want to do it. You don't want to do it. Nobody wants to do it. Even though Alabama, if you're not a fan of the SEC championship game, will be rooting hard for Mississippi State on Saturday night to beat Missouri. But it gives you some variety. It gives you the games against South Carolina. Alabama hosted them this year. They go there next year. It gives you the Vanderbilt game, which never probably would have happened. Or I don't know if it was on the schedule or not, with their old rotation. Missouri coming to Alabama. Like, it gives some variety. I like that. It also, from a more wide scale standpoint, divisions went away across all these conferences because the schools didn't want somebody winning the SEC championship game that would then be, or their championship game that would then be not in a good position to make the playoff before the playoff had automatic bids. You don't want your conference knocking itself out by having an upset in the conference championship game. They always wanted their 2 best teams, and that's kind of what that accomplished in theory. Now, there's no perfect way to do it. Like, every single year, there could be some crisscrossing wins, and this team beat that team, and the head-to-heads don't really cleanly match up. And that's why the tiebreakers come into place. Do the tiebreakers probably need some tweaking? Probably somehow. I mean, they're like 25 pages long. And then, could have given us a result like of LSU making the SEC championship game if they hadn't hit the abort button against Florida last week. So I don't know if there's a perfect way to do it. And at the end of the day, the SEC just signed a contract last year to have the SEC championship game in Atlanta through 2031 with a 5-year extension beyond that. And I don't know how much money is involved in that, but there's a contract at play too. And I don't think they would necessarily break the contract, and I don't think they would break, the TV part of it either, with ESPN in that game. Now, I think the better solution is to work it into the playoffs somehow. The SEC and the Big Ten have a lot of leverage in how the playoff is going to be shaped beyond 2025. So this new deal in 2026 is kind of up for grabs and how all this works. I think you have like a double bye scenario that the SEC and Big Ten should try to have, where that game is essentially a playoff game, the SEC championship game, where the Big Ten and the winner gets like a double bye, and you increase the reward for playing in the game instead of just getting rid of the game entirely and make it essentially part of the playoff, which I've argued it kind of already is. Like, I still view this as a quasi first round playoff game for Alabama. And quite frankly, I would still rather play Texas or Texas A&M in Atlanta than I would even going to Notre Dame or even going to Penn State, or I don't think they would go to Ohio State or Oregon at this point, but I would still rather play that game in Atlanta as my first round playoff game and still have the option of playing a first round playoff game again if I lose. Now, is it guaranteed they would get in? No. Do I think there's a decent chance? Yes. I'm still a proponent of the game. I just think it needs to be worked better into the playoff, which I think they probably will accomplish at some point in the near future.
Yeah, Alabama's fate is fine this year, but imagine a scenario where it's Tennessee that's going to play in the SEC championship. If you lose, you're out at this point. You can't tell me otherwise. I don't think the committee would value it. And you saw what Ward Manuel said on Tuesday. He started out by saying, "We value it. We're not going to make it a penalty." And then he said, "But the commissioners have told us to evaluate teams all the way through the conference championship, not to stop before that." And to me, that's him leaving the door open enough to say, if you look like crap, we're going to treat you like crap in that game. Doesn't matter if it's a 13th data point that everybody else has.
And that's what will give me pause about Alabama making it. Again, I think they have a decent chance of making it, but if they do lose to a Texas especially, you fall back into that pack with Georgia and Tennessee, and then you lose the head-to-head to Tennessee. You lose the Texas transitive game between you and Georgia. I think the committee would probably give Georgia a little bit of credit for having a close loss on the road to Alabama, and then they look at Georgia going on the road to Texas and winning. They look at Alabama theoretically, hypothetically losing to Texas on a neutral field, and I think Georgia gets in above Alabama in that scenario. I think Tennessee, which has kind of gotten screwed. Like I'm not a fan of anybody. I'm not a fan of Tennessee, but I think they've gotten screwed in this current situation because they didn't do anything. They lost on the road to Georgia. Like, you tell us that on September 1st, and we're like, all right, like, they're probably still going to make the playoff, especially if you told me they beat Alabama. I think they're just a victim of timing. And I think Ward Manuel even mentioned that in his conference call. Like, it depends when games are played, which I think is kind of bullshit. Because
it absolutely is.
Right. I thought it was a bad argument last year when Nick Saban and other people were trying to make it that Alabama was much better than they showed against Texas, and they should get it in over Texas if that was going to be the argument. You know, Florida State
beat Auburn, but go ahead.
Like, Texas came to your stadium and beat you by 10 points. It doesn't matter if it was in September or late November. I don't think that really should matter. I don't think it should. Tennessee should be penalized for the fact that they played the same game on the same weekend, the third Saturday in October every single year. If they played it the second or third Saturday in November and they just beat Alabama right now, guess what? Tennessee would be above Alabama. So it's absolutely idiocy. It's lunacy that they would fall behind for playing that game earlier than going to Georgia and losing. That's just a victim of scheduling and timing. So I think Tennessee's gotten screwed. I know people can say, whatever, it's Tennessee, but any given year that could be Alabama getting screwed too.
And here's the question I did not bring up in the story, and I'm curious what you guys think about it. Is the world better as far as bids for the SEC for other conferences too, not to have a conference championship game because of the idea of bid stealing and a 2 or 3 loss team that was on the outside looking in, upsetting a team that had a bid, and suddenly say the ACC's got 2 bids instead of 1 because you can't leave the ACC champion out?
I guess I do think that's good for the SEC and Big Ten to not have those conference championship games elsewhere. But I don't know if those conferences would go for that because especially if it's a team, you know, you still have situations where I think SMU and Miami don't play this year in the regular season. And theoretically, they could have both gone undefeated. And then if you only have one spot in the playoff to go to the ACC because you feel like they're inferior to the SEC, how the hell do you decide which one of those teams to send? And I think for those conferences, it decides something on the field. So I feel like an SMU, especially because I think they would kind of be looked at as the underdog, would probably want that chance to go to Charlotte and play that game against Miami. So yes, the SEC might not want that, but it's really not up to them. And I think those conferences and their members would want those games to stay. Plus, they, like anything else, they make money.
Yep.
I understand. Here's Kiffin's full comments that Alex included in his column, which is in the show notes, by the way. I'll give you the feeling from some other coaches that they don't want to be in it. The reward to get a bye versus the risk of getting knocked out completely, that's a really big risk just to get a bye. It's ended up being a very unique situation of all postseason sports, that the way that system is set up, you can go to that and get knocked out. And if you don't go, you're in. I'm not a big gambler, but that's one of those Vegas poker table things. All in. At first, I was kind of frustrated by Kiffin's comments because I was like, wouldn't you want to go and win? Right? Like just the whole competitive mindset, because we know that these guys are wired way differently than like the normal everyman and us three sitting right here. Like they want to go and they want to win, right? Like Tyler Booker made comments like that earlier this week. I guess I kind of understand. I might be talking a little bit out of my mouth here because I know like earlier when it was probably a few shows ago when Mike and I were kind of discussing the potential for Alabama to get to Atlanta. And I posed the question, like, would they even want to? And then, you know, you kind of see things unfold the way they go. And Alabama's playing really good ball right now. And it's like, well, yeah, like, I guess if I'm Alabama, I would want to go to Atlanta. I would want to win the game. Booker reinforced those comments. I don't know. Like I understand what you're saying in that, like, it's kind of a useless game right now. And we'll see kind of what the postseason ultimately unfolds, because like, this is, if I have this right, this is the only season they're doing a 12-team playoff, right? Like they're immediately jumping to 14 next year. So like, can the Big Ten and the SEC like work it in? And I don't know how the other conferences are going to feel about this, but like obviously the SEC and Big Ten are the major players here. If you get to the conference championship game, similar to what Mike was saying, you're in the playoff. If you win, you get a bye. If you lose, you got to like play a first round game, whether it's on the road or not. Like, I don't know. Like that seems an easy fix for something like this, but
if you guarantee, play it out. Say you guarantee the second team a spot. What does it mean to the fourth team before the game that thought that they were getting in?
The fourth team didn't earn it.
How do you protect them in that scenario? But what if it's Tennessee and they're sitting there going, well, damn it, we did earn it. We beat Alabama. Say Alabama wins the SEC championship. Tennessee's sitting at home going, what the absolute hell is happening that we just beat the SEC champion and we're not going to the playoff? Like, it's insane. And maybe there's a way to work it out that I haven't figured out, but I don't know that it's as clear cut as people want it to be. And again, to go back to your point, why do you want to play in the game?
To win it.
It's pride to win it. Give out a regular season SEC champion. Call them co-champions. You don't have to have the game. Remember, the game did not exist until 1992. Like, this is not some precious relic that we cannot touch. It's a fabrication. It was a really smart fabrication that did a lot of good things for the conference, and there's a reason every other conference wanted to do it. But you can still have a champion, and you can still have teams claim we won the SEC. That's still possible without having a game.
I feel like Around the Horn, not Around the Horn. What's that show? Pardon the interruption, where like at the end they have the corrections. I just wanted to say, in terms of the 12-team playoff, it's this year and next year, 2025.
This year and next year they're doing 12 teams.
And then 2026 is still undecided. All these commissioners have not been able to settle upon a new format for 2026 and beyond. And that's kind of where this whole idea of the SEC kind of strong arming the other conferences and saying we want 3 automatic bids, that came up last year, and the Big Ten saying the same thing, and then that got a lot of pushback, and now we're kind of in this wait and see mold where the SEC is kind of holding a gun to the head of people.
3 is a little aggressive. You can sell me on 2 though. Like the two teams that get to the conference championship games, like, yes, you're in. Like I'm on board with that. 3 seems I don't know. Like at that point, earn it.
I'm on record. I hate all automatic qualifiers, period. If you have an expanded playoff, you should not have to deal with those. Again, get rid of the conference championship game. But to the point of pride, does anybody sit back and go, man, we won, we got to the SEC championship at the end of the year. We got there. Nobody waves the flag if you lost the SEC championship game. It's not a thing you remember. I don't know how many people are going to go back to something we talked about on previous podcasts. If you win the SEC championship game and you lose your first round game, it's not first round, your first game by 2 touchdowns, do you think you're going to have a great taste in your mouth the whole offseason? Because I don't. I think we're going to subtly devalue what a conference championship means in an expanded playoff anyways.
And sorry, I'm sending emails about my trash not being picked up.
Mike's locked
in. Your full attention.
The city manager just emailed me back. I was just doing my civic duty of reporting missed trash.
Mountain Brook, you can actually talk to people. It's
get things done sometimes.
Yeah. Like pay all those taxes, baby.
Which I've completely lost my train of thought. Other than I had a fleeting thought that Vanderbilt also beat the hypothetical SEC champion this year, so they might have a claim too. But I'm with you on Tennessee. I think they would have a legitimate argument in terms
If I'm
of
Tennessee,
bids. Sorry,
regarding
I'm
bids.
scattershot right here, but I'm just going back in my brain on things that I've thought about. The automatic bids.
I'm going back in my brain of things I've thought about. Okay.
Right.
That's a dangerous road, but let's walk.
I agree that a format with just 12 or 14 of the best teams decided by the committee is probably the best product, would produce the best product. But you're not going to get the other commissioners to agree to that, or you haven't yet. Where, the group of 5 commissioners, Mike Oresco for a while, I think he just retired, the American guy, the Big 12, the ACC, Jim Phillips, and the Big 12 commissioner, his name is escaping me because they matter.
Yormack,
yeah, Brett Yormack. Like they're not going to go for that because they need the automatic qualifier to assure them a spot and in the playoffs. So that's kind of why the system exists with qualifiers. But I remember reading something, and I wish I could fact check this right now, that the SEC and Big Ten kind of worked something in recently that they can decide to format going forward. Which again,
they basically have veto power, I think,
right?
If I remember correctly.
It's just the arm is being twisted a little bit more each year, and eventually they're going to get what they want. But beyond that, I don't know what I was thinking about.
You know what this is Walmart and Target. If you're talking about the Big Ten and the SEC, this is Walmart and Target worrying about what some mom and pop hardware store is going to think for their expanded playoff. They should look at them and just say, be glad you still have a conference. Because if we want to take you, we will take you. And it's ridiculous that you're going to be held hostage. At the same time, the SEC and the Big Ten are being equally ridiculous by demanding automatic qualifiers.
And you hear these arguments too on Twitter from fans of other schools, whether it's Colorado or Iowa State or whatever, like of non-SEC Big Ten schools that say you didn't have to be in those conferences. Texas did not have to leave the SEC and now actually be in a position where if they lose to A&M, they're out. If they go to Atlanta and they lose to Alabama, they still might be out. Instead of Texas just running all over the Big 12 and
stealing their only automatic bid.
Like they're actually in a more precarious spot now. They're much richer for it, but they're in a more precarious spot as far as the playoff joining the SEC. And fans of these smaller, quote unquote, schools are saying you didn't have to do that. Like you could have stayed in your old conferences. Like we don't feel bad for you by joining those conferences. So
it feels bad for Texas, but that's
right. Exactly. But look, it all this feels untenable. Like there needs to be an equilibrium point where there's more equity, there's more quality, there's more parity, instead of having 2 conferences that are just so much bigger and better than the other ones. And then even within those conferences, you don't have enough strength of schedule balance. Like this whole thing is not tenable the way they're doing it. And it's going to take a stick of dynamite to just blow it all up and somebody to say, like kickball draft wise, like we're just going to pick you and you and you, and we'll go back and forth and we'll form a 30-team league and the rest of you can go take a hike because we don't care about you. Now, is that the best thing for college football as an institution? I don't know. But will people at the end of the day still watch those games between Texas and Georgia and Michigan and Ohio State and Alabama? Hell yeah, they will. And they care that they're not watching Arizona State or Wake Forest or Iowa State or any of those schools? Probably not. Like, that's just the reality of it.
I think this is a good transition into the 3rd edition of the college football playoff rankings. We found out Alabama's new spot, as well as kind of the lay of the land and what it means moving forward on Tuesday. Alabama checked in at number 7, but I believe when the bracket is ultimately put together, because it's the most confusing process ever, they're actually the 9 seed in the bracket, which means they would have a first-round game, I believe, at Notre Dame. I don't have the bracket in front of me, but I believe that's
correct.
What it would come out to. So that would be in the 8-9 matchup, which means the winner would get Oregon. And then if the bracket breaks, the winner of that quarterfinal game would get, in theory, Ohio State or Boise State potentially, because I think they put Boise State at the 4 seed this week. So interesting stuff. The actual, we'll go top 15, not top 25 of the new CFP rankings released earlier this week. Oregon still at number 1, Ohio State still at number 2, Texas at 3, Penn State at 4, Indiana at 5, Notre Dame at 6, Alabama 7, Miami 8, Ole Miss 9, Georgia 10, Tennessee 11, Boise State 12, and then SMU, BYU, Texas A&M 13, 14, 15. Do we have any thoughts, takeaways, reaction? Mike, I'll let you start.
It seems it's actually pretty clear cut at this point. Like we've said it on the show before for Alabama, like it really doesn't matter where they're ranked right now. Either they lose a game, Oklahoma or Auburn in route, or they win both games. And as long as Mississippi State doesn't pull up a pretty big upset on Saturday night against Missouri, like Alabama's in, they would clinch with the win over Auburn. So they're into the SEC championship game, I should say. And then from there, it's either you guarantee yourself a top 4 seed or you're falling back into that pack, like I mentioned before, and you're hoping for the best. So that's kind of clear cut. I feel like it's kind of clear cut that if Notre Dame wins out, they're probably in. It's clear cut that if Penn State wins out, they're in. It's clear cut that the loser of Ohio State and Oregon, assuming Ohio State beats Indiana, is in. The winner's obviously in. I think it's pretty clear cut that Georgia's in, unless Georgia, I don't know. I don't know if anything Georgia can do at this point other than lose to Georgia Tech or UMass.
There's still a world where they can get to Atlanta, right? Like if we
there is, yeah.
Shout out to the beta website that Alex referred to earlier, nothing.net. So they've been helping us
crazy.
out.
It just, I think it would require to some extent either Kentucky or Auburn winning this week against Texas or Texas A&M. You need to knock those teams back and then have that winning team or that losing team win the final week. But you kind of go right down the list. Like everybody is in a pretty good spot. Ole Miss is just kind of sitting there. Like Lane has a good reason just to be where he is, and they're probably in the playoff, and they're probably, almost guaranteed to be on the road and going to a place like Penn State, but that's better than sitting at home. So really it just comes down to like Indiana. I think how they play against Ohio State is going to go a long way to determine if they're in or not. If they keep it close, they're probably in as a 9-1 team. If they get blown out by 20, 30 points, then they're in a tough spot. That's going to go a long way. And that, I think, will affect Alabama in the losing hypothetical that you lose the SEC title game. So it's kind of clear cut. And then Tennessee's right there in the bubble too. That would benefit from a team like Indiana or Notre Dame losing. And the Big 10 or the Big 12 and the ACC winner is going to be in, and the loser is going to be out. So it's all kind of in front of us right now. Like it's pretty obvious what needs to happen, what could happen. And the variance has really tightened up with 2 weeks to go here, 3 weeks to go.
Just win, baby. What do we make of undefeated Indiana behind one-loss Penn State, even though they've played roughly the same schedule, but also ahead of one-loss Notre Dame and this pack of 2-loss SEC teams? Do we have any thoughts on Indiana? Do we want to pick on the Big Ten?
That show is hard to watch, that ESPN show that they do, because Booger, I feel like, is a nice guy. I don't know if I always agree with his observations or think they're the most astute observations. I actually find myself agreeing with Joey Galloway, but I think he's a dick. Like, I'm just going to say it. Like, he is.
You think Indiana should sit Curtis Rourke?
I don't like the way, like, watching that. It's uncomfortable. Like, Joey Galloway is not. Just be more civil with the discussion on national TV, especially the way he talks to Booger, the way he sometimes talks to McElroy. Like, it just.
You want Luke Holtz back? Is that what I'm hearing?
I feel like Game Day does it better. Like, they can disagree on some things, but Kirk and Desmond and Reese, like, and Saban, like Pat, it's more civil. Like, Galloway's just very
combative.
Yeah. And it's very awkward sometimes listening to that show, but they were having that Indiana discussion where Booger was saying, why are they ranked, behind a one-loss Penn State? Indiana is an undefeated team, and saying that they would be in trouble with another loss, which I think they would. But at the same time, I think it depends on how you lose, assuming you do lose to Ohio State. So I don't think it really matters right now, to be honest. where Indiana is in relation to Penn State? Like,
because I bring that up because we had mentioned like Tennessee being on the outs potentially. And if I'm the Vols, I'm really upset that the committee thinks that highly of Indiana, a team that has currently only played one team with a winning record. And by the end of the year, could have only played one team with a winning record, depending on what happens with Washington. They're the only winning record team that they've played thus far. And I believe they're 6-5 or only one game over 500 or something like that. And they still got 2 games left. So one of them is against Washington State, who's I think 8-1, something like that this year. So they could potentially lose, not finish with a winning record, which means Ohio State, who I think we all presume the Buckeyes are probably going to win. Like that's, if I'm the Vols, I'm mad about that. That's, I don't know, one man.
Again, yeah, and it's going to settle itself one way or the other. Indiana beats Ohio State, and then Indiana's in the Big Ten championship game, and you're not going to be compared to Indiana anymore. You're going to be compared to Ohio State as Tennessee, or Indiana loses, and then that comes more into focus. But Tennessee has a loss to Arkansas. That's the reason why they are where they are. And you don't lose that game, you're not on the bubble. If Alabama doesn't lose the Vanderbilt game, they're in a much better position right now. They're probably sitting where Texas is in the rankings. So those games do matter. The fact that Indiana hasn't tripped up in any of its easier games does matter. The fact that they are very efficient and they're a team that has beaten up on a lot of people, maybe with the exception of Michigan, I think matters. So there's no perfect way of looking at it, but this, strength of record on ESPN, Indiana's number 6, game control ranking, they're number 5. Efficiency wise, they're number 8 overall, the second most efficient offense in the country. Like,
I noticed you conveniently skipped their strength of schedule.
Well, ESPN strength of schedule is not, I wish they could do it comprehensively. They have your strength of schedule to date, and then they have your remaining strength of schedule. So like strength of schedule to date for Indiana is 106, but the remaining strength of schedule is 4 because they're going on the road to Ohio State. So yeah. I wish there was one combined number of what it would be at the end of the year. But ESPN does not make that easy to look at.
If you look at the Sagarin strength of schedule rank, Indiana is 77th.
Mm-hmm.
Woof. I don't mean to pick on Indiana because I think there's some merit to winning all the games that are in front of you. And outside of, I think, of punting their usual non-conference game against Louisville, schedule largely wasn't up to Signetti and company. But if I'm those SEC bubble teams, Ole Miss, Tennessee, whatever, and I look up at Indiana and it's just like, what have they done lately? That's probably where I would pitch a little bit of a fit.
This is the thing I keep talking about is this committee continues to disincentivize scheduling quality non-conference games. They continue to send the message that it doesn't matter by putting, honestly, the Texas ranking. If you're going to talk about Indiana and you're an SEC fan, you also need to recognize the Texas schedule is a little bit garbage too. So,
and there seems to be the sentiment too that, and Mike, you hit on this. If they lose to A&M, or if they go to Atlanta and lose to Alabama or Georgia again or whoever, they're probably on the backside of the 2-loss bubble, right? Like they're, for sure, if they don't go to Atlanta, they're probably not going to the playoff. But if they go to Atlanta and finish 11-2, like 11-2 versus 10-2 Ole Miss, 10-2 Tennessee, I don't know.
If they go to the SEC championship and lose to Alabama by 2 touchdowns, I don't know that they're in.
Who's this?
Texas.
No, I don't think they would be. I don't think they have the wins. But in terms of like the non-conference scheduling, like Alabama was very aggressive in doing that. Really the first couple of years that Byrne was here, he was scheduling a lot of those games out. They haven't scheduled one in years now, but this changes year to year. But what we kind of looked at as a really tough non-conference schedule for Alabama next year, for instance, does not look nearly as daunting. They're going to Florida State, which who knows what Florida State will look like. They're hosting Wisconsin and they have ULM at home. And then they have some other non-conference games in the future. West Virginia. They do have the Ohio State and Notre Dame series, but Georgia Tech, Oklahoma State, Boston College, Arizona, Minnesota, Virginia Tech, like all those schools could fall pretty far behind. And those all of a sudden feel like kind of blah games. And they already are. I mean, Oklahoma State is just, they're Clemson 2.0, like Mike Gundy stuck in the year 2005.
That's a weird blip on Oklahoma State's radar, though. They're routinely 9-10 wins.
I don't think they're going to be good anymore. Oklahoma State is my new Kentucky.
Hot take. Hot take. All
I think
right.
Mike Gundy the game has passed him by.
We still have to talk about Alabama, Oklahoma, but that would be a great title for a podcast. I'm just saying. Alex, you got any other lingering thoughts about the new CFP rankings, where Alabama's at, what the structure of things currently look like right now?
Not really. I agree with Rodak. I think the path is very clear.
For those who are just listening, Mike had a picture of Mike Gundy and put it up to his camera.
A flattering picture too.
Maybe it's just a mullet. I don't know. I'm not.
It's a great hair picture. I'll give you that. You picked a good one. Of the non-SEC related games, there are two that obviously stick out this weekend. Ohio State, Indiana, one of them. But then also Notre Dame, Army, right? America's team could really do the Vols a solid this weekend if they're able to beat Notre Dame. Do either of those two? Obviously, Indiana, Ohio State's going to draw some interest. It's an 11 a.m. game. We'll get to watch it because we don't kick until 6:30. But interest in that Notre Dame Army game, or is it just kind of like scoreboard watching? What do we think?
Scoreboard watching. I'm not. I just wonder about whether Army's legit or not.
I think they're the only team in
the stadium, which is cool.
I think they're the only team in the country that hasn't trailed at all this season. I think I remember hearing that or reading that somewhere.
I'm going to do this really quick. Here's their schedule: Lehigh, FAU, Rice, Temple, Tulsa, UAB, East Carolina, Air Force, North Texas.
We know their schedule's not good.
No, there's not good, and then there's what I just read to you.
Right. Yeah. There's Indiana, and then there's Army.
Yeah, and I'm not going to diss Army because I, like to live. But
if you say anything bad about Army, they could probably blow your house up.
Yeah. I mean, it's the American Conference. Like it's the old Conference USA with some few other service academies thrown in now. That's basically what it is.
Just saying, that was a game of interest that I wrote down. Wasn't sure if we were going to pay how close attention we were going to pay to it.
It's a game of interest, but I will not be doing more than flipping back and forth on it.
The primary game of interest, obviously, Alabama, Oklahoma. Again, 6:30 p.m. Saturday. Game's going to be on ABC. Usually when I talk to opposing beat writers, I ask at the top of the podcast, like, what's the vibe check of the team that you're covering? I talked to our buddy Tom Green, formerly of AL.com, now writes for Sooners Illustrated, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Like, hey, man, what's the vibe check with the Sooners? And he came back very straight-faced. The vibes are bad right now. You look at the Sooners, 5-5 overall. They're an SEC newbie, right? They won 4 of their first 5 games. They have since lost 4 of their last 5 games. The offense stinks. The defense still pretty good for the most part, but can be had in some areas. I'm not sure that they deal with dual threat quarterbacks very well. Things have kind of fallen apart in Norman in a way that they haven't really. They're one of those teams that probably could have stayed in the Big 12 and continued to win 8, 9, 10 games a year. It was usually them in Texas, right? Like I grew up in Big 12 country. Oklahoma was always kind of the boss at the end of the tunnel if you wanted to go play in the big postseason games. What do we make of this game? It's in Norman. It's a night game. There's still talent on that roster. They haven't played particularly well, but I guess I'm teeing this up as, are there some trappy elements to this, or how do we feel about the matchup? Alex, you're laughing. I'm gonna let you go first.
The whole thing's a trap. It is the trappiest game you could possibly get. If I'm an Alabama fan, it scares the shit out of me because of the time of the game, the time of year, the fact that you got Auburn coming up on the backside of it, and then the matchups I don't like. I just don't like it. I'm not confident yet that Alabama's defense can stop a running quarterback. What does Oklahoma have? Jackson Arnold can't throw the football, but he's athletic. Don't tell me they won't try to get him outside and try to break some big gains. And then on the other side of the ball, I don't like Brendan Venables as a head coach. I've said it many times on this very podcast, but he can scheme up a defense. And Jalen Milroe still needs to show when a defense takes away the run, what are you going to do? I think this is very much a game where Alabama's going to have to adjust to something, whether it's on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And it feels like a game where the first team to score might win. As crazy as that sounds, it's a 14-point spread. But if Oklahoma somehow jumps out to a lead and is able to run the football, puts Alabama in a really weird position. It's an icky game for Alabama for a game that you're a double-digit favorite in.
And you have been on that for a while. I'd say when we did the offseason things about tough games and all that. Like you've been saying from the start that this is a trap game. And look, if Alabama loses this game, if Oklahoma wins, then I think they should rename the stadium, which is currently Gaylord Stadium, to Scarborough Stadium, because I think that you will have deserved the recognition of
Thank you.
having seen Oklahoma do this.
Yeah.
So
I might have to leave the state of Alabama, but okay.
Right. I think instead of Gaylord Family Stadium, it should be Scarborough Family Stadium, because
I think they just refer to it as Memorial.
That's what it's called. It's called Gaylord Family Stadium. I'm looking
That's
at
what Google says it's called, but I'm pretty sure they just call it Memorial.
It's like Texas. Texas is the same thing. It's like DKR, Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium. Like you can't have one memorial. Like I was in Buffalo. There was a Memorial Stadium in Buffalo.
Yeah. It's hard for anybody to say anything when certain segments of the athletic department want it called Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium in every single reference.
But I feel like every stadium built in like the 1920s or 40s was Memorial Stadium, because it was either World War I Memorial Stadium or World War II Memorial Stadium. I feel like every single, like Cleveland had one, right? There's one everywhere. Veterans Memorial Coliseum.
Soldier Field. Soldier Field's such a great name. Should have been used more.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. There should be a Wikipedia article.
This level of analysis, you won't get anywhere else.
Did you know that Troy's stadium is called Veterans Memorial Stadium?
That,
have you ever been there?
Yeah, multiple times.
For what?
For stories. When I worked at ESPN.
People write about Troy?
They upset LSU one year, and they had a 5'8" walk-on linebacker who set the NCAA record for tackles.
Just like me, for real.
Carlton Marshall.
There's hope for Cody after all.
Yeah.
Was there ever not?
Well,
I need to go and get chiropracted, so it's been fun. But
enjoy your adjustment. Alex and I will take us home.
I'm going to go adjust myself.
Leave.
No, I think I wanted to wrap up with a couple of thoughts that you kind of hit on, just with the trappiness of this. I know it's been a while since I brought up our EA College Football 25 sim, but so I ran this sim this week, Alabama, Oklahoma. In the sim, again, the sim has not been exactly tit for tat what it's been like in real life. In the sim, Alabama was 10-0, ranked number 3 in the country. Oklahoma was 2-8, 1-6 in SEC play. So I guess they got the whole Oklahoma's struggling with the new conference thing right in the sim. But okay, so here's what happened. Alabama finally lost in our simulation experiment, and they lost bad. Oklahoma won the game 35-0. Jalen Milroe threw 4 interceptions and lost 2 fumbles. If you looked at the final stats from the game, Alabama actually outgained them. They were moving the ball fine, but there was an end zone pick in the first half, and then there was a series of like 3 consecutive Alabama possessions in the second half where it was pick, fumble, and then there was also a fumble, scoop, and score by Oklahoma's defense. So I don't think that that's exactly how the game is going to go, but I think it's instructive to think about that. One, yes, Oklahoma's defense, despite the offensive struggles, continues to play at a pretty high level, right? I think they're top 10 in ESPN's efficiency ratings. They're top 25 in total defense. Brent Venables has done a really good job of getting those guys continue to play, even when there's really not a ton of hope on the other side or the offense has continued to struggle. But also, if Milroe has a bad game, things could get weird. I think the sim is indicative of that. And two, the other thing that Tom and I talked about on the other podcast was the whole turnover thing. Alabama's done a really good job taking the ball off of people. I wrote about it this week, 24 total takeaways this season, which is an insane number. And even more insane is that 16 of them have come in the last 5 games. I could not find another time in Alabama's documented history where they had 3 or more turnovers in 5 consecutive games. Like, they're taking the ball off of people. On the flip side, Oklahoma likes to give the ball away. I'm pretty sure they're last in the SEC in turnover margin, while Alabama, I believe, is number 2 they're number 2 in total takeaways. They might be number 1 in total turnover margin. So if Alabama does not take care of the ball and you allow Oklahoma to linger, like in the sim, the Sooners led 7-0 at halftime before they blew it open with all the turnovers in the second half, things could get kind of weird. So I kind of feel you on the whole trappiness of the game.
Yeah, and look, Kane Womack has done a terrific job, and he continues to prove me wrong with the idea that turnovers are fluky. I'm backed up by a lot of data and a lot of smart people. But there's the pessimistic side of me that says, how much longer can you keep this turnover machine going? And if the wheels fall off, and then Milroe, who's played clean football on the other side of it the last 3 weeks, has a turnover or two, if those two things happen in conjunction on the road in what I expect to be a really intense environment, knowing that you lose, you're out of the playoff mix, there's just a lot there that gives me hesitancy that, can this game go sideways on Alabama? You got to like the way Deontay Lawson, Jahad Campbell are playing. You got to like the confidence of the offense, especially the offensive line. I think they're playing at a really high level. But it's just this game gives me weird vibes. If we're going to bring it all the way back around, I don't know. I just don't know.
I think that's fair. And the other thing too that I made note of when I was writing about the whole takeaways thing is that there is a huge element of luck to takeaways. Like, I'm not dismissing that, but I'll give Kane this, man. Like, they make an emphasis, and I think it was Malachi Moore had this exact quote. They put a value on the ball as defenders. So like, it's not just the interceptions and the fumble recoveries. It's the fact that they have forced 12 fumbles this year. It's the fact that the defensive line has 11 batted passes in 10 games, which is as many as they had in 14 last year. They are one of the nation's leaders in pass breakups. Like, they are doing a pretty good job of attacking the ball. I know earlier in the season, and even I guess through the midway point of the season, sometimes that got them in a little bit of trouble, right? They were susceptible to giving up some deep passes, or at least getting beat on routes if the quarterbacks didn't always connect on some of those deeper passes. I think the other thing too that's probably helped them during this stretch of forcing all these takeaways and turnovers is you look at the quarterbacks that they have played in that stretch over the last 5 games. Lenora Sellers has a propensity to put the ball on the ground, right? Nico Iamaleava, as talented as he is, still a freshman, right? And then after that, you've got Drew Pine, the bad version of Garrett Nussmeier, Mercer. Oklahoma's quarterbacks are talented, but like Jackson Arnold, again, a little bit of a propensity, maybe not to throw interceptions or even interceptable passes. He's a pretty efficient quarterback, but sometimes he fumbles. And then Michael Hawkins Jr., who's kind of their dual threat guy who has come in lieu of Jackson Arnold at times this year, a little bit more careless, a little bit more of a gunslinger's mentality. So there probably will be more opportunities. I think that if you're Oklahoma, you kind of want to take a page out of Vanderbilt's playbook, right? Like, you want to establish the run, which is something that they have done decently well. They really haven't done anything really well on offense this year, but they can run the ball a little bit. So if you can establish the run a little bit, play a little bit of ball control, take care of the ball, right? Vanderbilt didn't turn the ball over at all, and then take advantage of a couple of small mistakes here and there, get Memorial crowd going crazy at night. I don't know. At this point, you probably want to just keep it close in the fourth quarter to have an opportunity to potentially steal it.
It's a good idea to do this in any game, but I think it'll be especially important today. Who wins the line of scrimmage when it's Alabama's defensive line versus Oklahoma's offensive line? Because their line is bad. I mean, we talked about it during the offseason, looking at, like, you brought in 5 new starters. Good luck with that. It has not panned out well. So if they can do that and they can win the line of scrimmage and really wreak havoc in the backfield, they're going to be in a good spot. They haven't always done the best job of that. The batted passes thing, if you're not going to get to the quarterback, that's the absolute thing you need to do. So you got to give them credit for doing those things. But again, if early in the game they're winning the line of scrimmage, I think Alabama is going to be in a good spot. If they're not, and you're not winning the battle you should win on paper, could get scary.
And you look at some of the games that Oklahoma has lost pretty lopsided, right? Like, Ole Miss has Walter Nolan, right, in the middle of that line. They went to South Carolina and got blown out 35-9. They have Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart. Alabama doesn't exactly have those game records, right? This is not news, but can you take advantage of, one, an offensive line that struggled, and two, like, not only have they struggled, that they've been dealing with injuries, so they've been cycling a lot of guys in and out. Can you take advantage of that early, especially? Because the other thought I have of this game, this kind of reminds me, it's not a 1-for-1 comparison, but I remember Alabama, after the big win over LSU last season, they had to go on the road to Kentucky, and Kentucky's whatever, but like, there were some trappy elements to that game, and Alabama took Kentucky out of that game immediately, right? Like, they scored 21 points first 3 drives. They're up 28-7 at half. Like, that game was done. I would like to see them do the same thing to this Oklahoma team that is beat down, that is not playing very well. Yes, this game's in prime time. Yes, it's in Norman. The crowd's probably going to be good, but can you take them out of it in the same way that you took the LSU fans out of Tiger Stadium? Like, just
that's the thing Alabama's done really well the last 3 games is they've been Alabama, which is when you got a team down, you do not let them back up. One name to watch, I think, in this game is LT Overton. He has not really flashed the last few weeks after having a strong start to the season. If he can be a guy who can get to the quarterback, doesn't necessarily have to be a sack, but if he can get to the quarterback and affect the quarterback, I think that'd be huge in this game. He needs to kind of bubble back up after receding a little bit.
I agree with that. And he's not going to be playing Will Campbell, right?
Yeah.
So like this is a guy that normally wins his one-on-one matchups when he's not playing a future NFL offensive tackle. Like I'm not sure that anybody on Oklahoma's offensive line this year is going to be headed to the NFL. So can you win your one-on-ones? Can you win them early to establish that and allow the offense to go to work? That's more or less all the thoughts I had on this Alabama-Oklahoma game. Again, 6:30 p.m. ABC Saturday night. Should be a fun one. I've never been to Norman before. I've been to Oklahoma City before, which is where we're flying into. Have you been to Oklahoma City before?
I've been to Oklahoma City. I've been on the campus and outside of the stadium at OU, but I've never actually been to a game. So I'm looking forward to it.
Nice. We welcome the SEC newbies by going to their place, I guess. Should be kind of fun. I enjoy the road trips. That's all we've got on today's show, guys. We'll be back Sunday to recap whatever happens on Saturday night between Alabama and Oklahoma. In the meantime, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 24/7 and 24/7 Sports, where you can get all of our great coverage of the Crimson Tide. We just had a basketball game the other night in Birmingham that Mike and I were at. We obviously wrote about that story. Big top 25 win for Alabama hoops. And then obviously we'll all be in Norman for Alabama, Oklahoma this Saturday. We don't want you guys to miss a thing. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.